Within Kagurabachi's power system is an incredibly out there ability conceptually, which not only sees a lot of use within the narrative up to this point, but is arguably what one of its most memorable narrative arcs revolves around. The Storehouse ability of the Sazanami family is one of the first examples we get in Kagurabachi of a supernatural ability made for use not explicitly combat focused. The Storehouse is a spatial sorcery that is exclusive to the Sazanami family and is passed on through a ceremony where the patriarch of the family who currently possesses the ability will pass it on to the next head of the family in order to facilitate that person's ability to continue running the Yurakuza Ichi auction, which the Sazanami family upholds. The Storehouse itself is this pocket dimension in which things can be registered and moved in and out of at will by the wielder. Only one person can possess the Storehouse at a time if the Storehouse has been passed on by the necessary ritual. And when someone gains access to the Storehouse, it overwrites their natural sorcery that they were already born with. Like in the case of Kyora Sazanami, the current head of the Sazanami family, when he was granted access to the store ability by the last patriarch of the family, his father, he lost access to the familial sorcery ability that all Sazanami family members are born with, Iso, and in exchange gained access to the Storehouse. There is a patriarch in the past who was born with both Iso and the Storehouse at the same time, making them a standout within Kagurabachi's universe as people are only born with one form of sorcery. While the Storehouse is now passed on to people, it is believed that at some point somebody could be born with both abilities again. So as I mentioned before, the fundamental ability of the Storehouse is to register things and move them from the normal world to a pocket world that is the Storehouse itself, or vice versa, to take things registered by the Storehouse and move them from the Storehouse back to the real world. The Sazanami family uses the Storehouse as a way to keep their product for the criminal auction away from the public, as the only people who can access the Storehouse are people who are either aware of an emergency entrance or someone who has access to the ability itself. What's interesting to me is, despite storing things within the Storehouse itself being a big reason for the ability being in the arc it is, the ways it's most interestingly used are arguably chalked up to registering things to the Storehouse and calling them from the pocket dimension at will. You see, when something is touched with spiritual energy by the person who has access to the Storehouse ability, it is then able to be called to or from the Storehouse by the person at will. One of my favorite examples of this registration, sending, and calling sort of dynamic with the Storehouse is the way that we see Kyora call weapons from afar to his children fighting for him. Like if one of their swords is broken mid-combat, they can call for another sword and he can just send it to them wirelessly. Kyora is shown doing this thing that he calls a video projection / a video image, in which he can display a image to the outside world of something occurring within the Storehouse. Like during the auction itself, while Kyora is actually fighting Chihiro in the Storehouse, he is displaying this image to the outside to keep the auction going as normal. I think that one's an especially cool minor use case of the Storehouse. We see during Kyora's fight with Chihiro in the Storehouse that Kyora is granted full control over the actual shape of the Storehouse itself, so he can use it like a battlefield of sorts that he can control the shape of, making spikes and whatnot that characters have to dodge when they're in his space. And we even see Kyora use the ability to teleport people, like he registers his children within the Storehouse and then he can call them from afar to any point at any time. Like, just imagine if somebody had an ability like the Storehouse and was in the army. In theory, they could cover someone in their spiritual energy, thusly registering them as a part of the Storehouse, and at any place in time, Kyora can call them to the Storehouse, then from the Storehouse to wherever he is, and bam, all of a sudden, you can teleport an entire army to your position. While everything that Hakuri Sazanami can do with the Storehouse, Kyora can also do, the main point of this distinction in the video is that the way Kyora uses his ability within the Rakuza Ichi arc presents the idea that he's narrow-minded, selfish, and keeping to tradition too much, which are the things that ultimately make him fail as an antagonist, and are ultimately also the things that Hakuri shows him up on when it's revealed that despite being ostracized by his family for seemingly having no sorcery, he's actually the first person to be born with both the Storehouse and Iso at once since that original patriarch, making him basically representative of everything Kyora didn't want to use the Storehouse for, but in the form of somebody who can use the ability in that way and does so in those ways, which is probably why we see Hakuri do a lot of the things that Kyora does with the Storehouse and then some when he gets access to the ability for the first time in such a short span of time, despite the fact that Kyora has had it for decades at this point. That's getting into the narrative point of Hakuri getting access to the Storehouse, and I'd like to discuss that further in a Rakuza Ichi specific video. So let's talk about the specific things we see Hakuri using the ability to do after he gets access to it, / what that individually teaches us about the ability and its capabilities and its interactions with spiritual energy / sorcery as a broader power system. We see Kyora demonstrate the ability to teleport people into the Storehouse and out of the Storehouse, but we don't see him demonstrate the ability to teleport people within the Storehouse itself like Hakuri does. And at the same time, we see Hakuri use the ability to create a video projection within the Storehouse itself instead of just outside of the Storehouse. One of my favorite exclusive things that we see Hakuri do within the Storehouse is take a bunch of grenades that are about to explode around Chihiro and teleport them out of the Storehouse as he slashes them with his sword N10, because N10, being a sword powered by spiritual power, gives those grenades a spiritual power signature that Hakuri can then use to teleport them out of the Storehouse. It's fucking raw. We also see that in the instance of more than one person having access to the Storehouse ability, that each individual Storehouse does exist within its own pocket realm, but interaction between the two is possible, like in the instance of Hakuri marking Chihiro with his spiritual energy and then using that to send him into Kyora's Storehouse after Hakuri confirmed his ability to send a random object into Kyora's Storehouse on its own. And of course, looking to the future, as far as Chihiro's main quest within Kagurabachi 2, Hakuri proves invaluable by nature of the Storehouse being able to keep things like the enchanted blades away from the majority of the population once Hakuri has access to them. First things first, Hakuri Sazanami's example of how to utilize the Storehouse in a more versatile manner, both for defensive and offensive means, has proved invaluable for the forward storytelling of Kagurabachi. Despite the fact he is out of commission within the current arc of the narrative, I do believe that he is an integral part of the narrative going forward, and I think that the Storehouse conceptually can only go up as far as complexity and conceptual narrative importance. I think having a character like Hakuri with the development that he's gotten alongside Chihiro in his main quest is only to Kagurabachi's benefit, and I think that having an ability like the Storehouse so prominently within the forefront of the narrative is also only to the narrative's benefit as far as it might want to present fights or general stakes within said narrative. Like the Storehouse being such an important thing going into the future just makes Hakuri being out of commission for the next little while that much more important, on the basis that his ability really could be that useful right now if he were here. Actual ability function wise, I mentioned it before, but I am a big fan of the remote transportation of weapons element that we see Kyora utilize with the Storehouse. On that even, I actually just in general really like the sort of blood clot within 3D space visual that is associated with the Storehouse spawning things in the real world. The way in which the Rakuza Ichi arc revolves around Chihiro and his teammates trying to get access to the Storehouse even not knowing how it acts directly. That I just really like in general, although that comes down less to a thing I generally like about how the Storehouse functions and more how the narrative revolves around the idea of how the Storehouse functions. I really like the way that the Storehouse acts as one of two examples in Kagurabachi up to this point of what spatial manipulation sorcery is like. The way in which the Storehouse ability is an example of sorcery being used not explicitly for combat, in the sense of how the Yakuza Ichi's criminal auction efforts are focused predominantly on the usage of the Storehouse. That, I think, is the coolest part of how the ability is used in the story. Like within battle shonens, I tend to really appreciate the abilities that have usage outside of combat or are not explicitly focused on usage within combat, and the Storehouse is to the benefit of both of those ideas by having offensive capabilities like with Kyora pulling blades out of the Storehouse remotely, while also being an ability that is generally best used as basically a pocket inventory that Kyora can pull from at will. I really like the Storehouse as far as the dynamic that it offers for a hereditary ability within Kagurabachi. I feel like the idea of supernatural abilities that are passed on through blood connection is woefully underexplored within battle shonens. Like the closest I can think of is the Gojo clan passing on the Six Eyes and the Limitless technique being like a cornerstone of Gojo's identity crisis within Jujutsu Kaisen. But even then, I felt like Jujutsu Kaisen personally was a little underexplored when it came to the idea of exploring hereditary supernatural abilities. So Kagurabachi being more willing to explore an idea like that with the Sazanami family, the Rakuzaichi arc, and the Storehouse as a supernatural power just really makes me happy. Of course, too, for any Jujutsu Kaisen fans out there, Kyora's fight ending up in the Storehouse itself and his ability to manipulate the space within that is very reminiscent of domain expansions as a shonen ability power-up, and I just really like domain expansions as a concept, so I'm glad that Kagurabachi is kind of starting to get a little closer towards that.